Hi, welcome to the introduction of photography. What I wanted to do is give an opportunity to cover off why you may want to go from a smartphone to a camera like this, or if you already own a camera, know what to do when you're in aperture, shutter speed, and manual modes. For a lot of you, if you have made the leap to a dedicated camera, those particular modes might be a bit of a mystery. So we're going to take some time to explain what all that does. The fundamentals between a smartphone, a camera like this, or any other camera is that they're the same as far as photography is concerned. There's really only three variables. So let's have a moment and have a look at that together. What I want to do is talk about the exposure triangle. And there are three fundamentals associated with it, which is how quickly am I taking that picture, how much light is entering the camera, and how sensitive is the film or the camera sensor to light. So the first thing I want to do is actually invert that around to think about a teeter-totter, which is if I make a change as far as the amount of light coming into the camera, I'm going to have a lower F number, which means there's more light, and I'm going to have to balance that off with being able to increase my shutter speed. That now brings that into balance. If I increase my F number, which means that I have a lower amount of light entering into the camera, I'm going to have a slower shutter speed to balance that off. And the same thing holds true as if I need a faster shutter speed, I need a lower F number, and if I need a slower shutter speed, I need a faster way of solving that problem by reducing the amount of light entering in the camera. The ISO part of that is something that would not really be an applicable conversation with film. And the reason being is when you put film into the camera, it had a fixed ISO. That also has an impact on what we do in the digital world, which is where do you want to go with the ISO? And the challenge with ISO is that the higher the ISO number becomes, or the lower it becomes, the less or more sensitive the camera is to light. But it also has an impact on the quality of the output that you have, because the higher the amount of gain that you have for ISO in the digital world, the more noise that you're going to have impacting your shot. So the one thing that we need to keep in mind is some numbers. So the thing about a camera lens is that it's set up in a measurement called f-stops. And they are a ratio associated with the aperture versus the length of the lens. The challenge with it is that they don't seem to make a lot of sense until you start to become more familiar with them. So we'll start off with an easy number, which is we'll start off with the f2. The next one is going to be half the amount of light, which is f2.8. And I'm going to have to balance that off with half the shutter speed. So every time you make a major change in an F number, so if I go from f2 to f2.8, that's half the amount of light. If I go to f2 to f4, that's a quarter of the amount of light. And I'm going to have to make that up by doing changes to shutter speed. Whereas shutter speed seems to be a bit more apparent, where I go from 1/250th of a second at f8, and if I go down to 1/125th of a second, that's now twice as much light, so I need to go to f11. If I go to 1/250th of a second and I change to 1/500th of a second, that's half the amount of light. So now I need to get that balanced off by bringing in more light into the camera, and I need to go to f5.6. ISO is not too dissimilar to what the shutter speed ratings are, but you are into 100, 200, 400, 1000, 1600, and so on for sensitivities to be even matches, to be what would be the equivalent to an f-stop or shutter speed. And this comes into another concept called exposure value. So you may see on your camera a button that we're going to have a quick little demo of that will have an impact on program modes, where if you make a change to do exposure value compensation, it's the equivalent of making a change to a shutter speed or making a change to my aperture. In manual mode, that exposure value compensation button really doesn't do you any good because you're in manual mode. This is where the impact comes into play with the computer programs. So one full EV is the equivalent to one full change in something from 1/250th to 1/500th. If I turn around and say that I'm going to go to a -1 EV, I'm actually going to be decreasing the amount of light into the camera. If I go a plus EV, it means I'm bringing more light into the camera. But we'll show you a few examples of that in a live video with a Nikon camera.